A very good morning to all our dear listeners, viewers. Welcome to ACFIM Talks. It's another edition. Today, with you, Felix Kafuma, your usual host, and I'll be moderating this session. We are discussing a very important topic at the behest of a very interesting landmark where Uganda, I think it was early in the week, when the final investment decision concerning the oil production was announced. So in 2016, I think it was 2016 or 2006 actually, the commercial viability of oil in Uganda was discovered, and since then, Uganda has walked the journey to make this happen. With me in the studio, I have Onesmus Mugyenyi and Winfred Ngabiirwe. I'll be introducing them in a short while. But allow me first to invite everybody to join and be part of this discussion by joining our social media platforms on Facebook and Twitter, including our YouTube channel, and be part of the conversation. You send your comments, you send your questions, and we'll be able to answer them. And also be able to pick your thoughts on a very interesting discussion or topic for today. Uganda's oil, is it a blessing or is it a curse? Allow me to lay a bit of foundation and context to this discussion. As you all know, last week, the final investment decision for oil production in the Alberta region was announced. This announcement signified the commitment of the oil companies to invest close to 10 billion US dollars, which translates to about 34 trillion Uganda shillings, basically to develop Uganda's oil and gas resources through the implementation of the Tilenga project in Bulisa and Mwea districts, the Kingfisher project in Hoima and Chikube districts, and the East African crude oil pipeline, which has come to be known as the ECO, which apparently is going to cross the 10 districts of Hoima, Chikube, Kakumiro, Chankwanzi, Gomba, Mwende, Wengo, Sembaole, Chotera, and Rakai in Uganda. So the signing of this final investment decision officially sets in motion the detailed engineering, procurement, construction phase by a joint venture of partners, which involves or includes the Uganda National Oil Company, that is the one that protects the interests of Uganda, Total Energies, and then China National Offshore Oil Corporation, SINOC, with a commitment to start production by 2025. Like I said, this journey began in 2006 when the commercial viability of oil production in Uganda was discovered. Like I said, with me, I have two panelists. I'll start with the lady, Winfred Ngabiirwe, who is the Executive Director of Global Rights Alert and has over 15 years of experience in development work, 10 of which have been in natural resource governance. So she has engaged in natural resources, handling campaigns from local to international, addressing aspects of gender and inclusion, community rights, as well as corporate accountability. Winfred is an active member of Publish What You Pay campaign, Civil Society Coalition on Oil and Gas, and is also representative to the Uganda Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative, EITI. Winfred, you're most welcome to ACFIM Talks.
Thank you, Felix. Good morning to you and to the listeners.
It's a pleasure to have you. Our second panelist is Mugyenyi Onesmus, who is a public analyst, is a researcher, done a lot of policy analysis on a number of areas, and he has equally published these papers and researches. He has extensive knowledge in natural resource governance and very good understanding of national development frameworks. He's an advocate for the High Court of Uganda with wide experience in providing policy and legal advisory services. He's also a member of Uganda Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, but oversees its implementation in Uganda as well. Onesmus, you're most welcome to ACFIM Talks.
Thank you, and good morning to you, listeners and viewers.
All right. Like I said earlier, I introduced myself as usual. My name is Felix Afuma, who is going to moderate today's session where we discuss Uganda's oil. Is it a blessing? Is it a curse? And allow me to pick it up from there. First of all, Onesmus, let me start with you on this one. Finally, the long-awaited oil production in Uganda is set to start. There were a lot of smiles, a lot of anticipations, and the first phase is already in motion now that we signed. What is your take to be when concerning this greatest achievement or landmark? I should call it a landmark. Should we get concerned or should we get excited? From where you are, what is your take and quick thoughts on this landmark?
Thank you very much, Felix, for that question. I want to believe that we do appreciate exactly what we mean when we talk about this oil curse. And I want to start from there so that as we move on, we're able to understand each other. That the oil curse basically is that paradoxical situation or unpleasant situation in which a country performs underperforms economically despite having oil and gas, and that is picked from the resource curse, basically, which looks at availability of natural resources, but you have people in poverty, or the country is not able to lift its people out of poverty. And obviously, when the commercially viable oil was pronounced, and finally the final investment decision, there was excitement in the country, and rightly so, because of what is known about oil. There was also some level of anxiety in terms of those who understand what oil means. And I imagine that's why we have this topic, oil a curse or a blessing. Now that we are just moving into production, because we've been in the process of exploration. And now that the final investment decision has been made, we are moving into production, and therefore the development of the infrastructure leading to the production of the first oil. So we don't have oil as we speak. And therefore, whether a curse or a blessing, we'll basically use the predictive analysis, looking at the situation, where we are coming from, where we are. What do we expect? Should we expect it's going to be a curse? Should we expect it's going to be a blessing? Felix, allow me then to say that for oil to be a curse, there are certain situations that normally exist. Normally, countries get excited about the revenues because it is a high value product, and then they go into borrowing, and they borrow, and you know that the prices of oil are so volatile, and subsequently you find that you've overborrowed, and therefore you are not able to make money out of the product. And you know where this country is in terms of borrowing. I think we are now at 50% of the GDP, which is really not a good indicator. But the second thing is that normally when countries discover oil, they increase their appetite for military dominance and expeditions. And countries that have pursued that have certainly seen oil as a curse, because then you waste all the resources, all the revenues in military expeditions, trying to become militarily dominant. But we also have the corruption perspective. You know, there are big deals in oil. And if you're a country with a high appetite for corruption, and you know where Uganda is, it's now in the club of the South Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, Libya. And when you look at the ranking, it is among the 40 most corrupt countries out of the 180 across the globe. So if we don't check that, certainly oil will finally become a curse. So I wanted to start it from that perspective. We also have the environmental aspects. We also have the negative social and economic impacts, which, if not managed, obviously oil turns into a curse. It can only turn into a blessing when you do the reverse. You get the revenue, you use the revenue properly to develop infrastructure, you invest in other sectors of the economy, so that even when the resource is finished, you still have something to show that you got out of this oil. I hope that gives us some fair perspective of why we are talking about the oil curse and then the oil as a blessing.
Thank you so much, Onesmus. You really paint the picture of what makes it a curse and what makes it a blessing. And you made some indicators, and I was looking at Uganda, talked about our debt ratio, you talked about corruption, you talked about our appetite for foreign military excursions. Let me bring you in here, Winfred. What's your take looking at Uganda, where we are at the moment? Should we get excited? Should we get concerned?
Thank you very much. Maybe just to give us a perspective, I just wanted us to know how much oil we are talking about and where it is. So you know we discovered oil in 2006, as you mentioned, and so far we have confirmed 6 billion barrels of oil. Out of that, commercially, we can get out 1.4. So that's the oil that we know we have, and we can extract and we can sell. But we know that more than 80% of the potentially oil-rich area is not yet explored. So we have a big part of the Albertine that we have not explored, and we believe that we could have more oil than we have confirmed so far. And the players we have, Total Energies, that you saw featured dominantly when we signed when they announced the final investment decision. We have CNOOC that you mentioned. We have the Uganda National Oil Company that is representing us as Uganda, representing our commercial interests. As well, we have Ama Energy as well as Oranto. And those are still doing exploration. Are we excited? Yes. I think since 2006 to date, there are so many years, and Ugandans, have been expecting, when is the oil flowing? I think we're almost moving around with our jerry cans. Every time our petrol prices go up, we're thinking of when does Ugandan oil get into the petrol stations, and we probably start, benefiting and enjoying that resource. But beyond that, there are people that have invested heavily in the industry. There are businessmen that have invested heavily in the industry. I know that our budget projections also always refer to resources from oil. I know that if you look at the National Development Plan, especially the third one, it relies heavily on the resources that are going to come from oil, gas, and other minerals, but also communities, especially those that are in the areas where infrastructure developments are taking place, especially those that have been, promised compensation, or those that are looking to providing goods and services, have been wondering when this will be. So we are excited, and we congratulate the government on one hand, and of course oil companies. But on another hand, we know that the work has just started. We've been dealing with land acquisition, compensation, studies, environmental impact studies, raising concerns, informing legislation, informing the processes that have been going on, and now the works begin. We acquired land for what? So the construction of pipelines, the one that is going to Tanga in Tanzania that will take our oil, the refinery, the airport is almost complete, the feeder pipelines that are going to be coming from various oil wells, all that work is going to begin, and that has an implication on how communities will live around that. But also it has very, very good promises, because then it opens up, space and opportunities for services and goods to be provided. So we hope that we're going to see a lot of foreign investment coming in by the oil companies. The pipeline alone could see us having foreign direct investment of about 3.5 billion US dollars. But also we know that, in terms of local content and preparations, there are many small and medium enterprises that have been trained, that have positioned themselves. Others probably have acquired loans. So we expect to see them providing goods and services and earning, and that money, economically will boost who we are as a country, and our revenues are supposed to be really, improving. We are also going to have, once the production of oil starts, we're going to see ourselves saving a lot of money, maybe about 1.7 billion US dollars that we have been spending on importing, oil-related products. So that, yes, are we heading in the right direction? We needed the final investment decision to be taken. Are we prepared? We're talking about local content. We're talking about construction of pipelines. We're talking about many people, over 160 people in camps. What does that mean to a community that lived on its own? What does that mean into the traffic on our roads? What does that mean in terms of social norms and practices? What does that mean in terms of environment that Onesmus talked about? At a national level, I know that works around legislation to make sure that we have the right laws. We have the Petroleum Authority in place. We have the EITI group in place. The Ministry of Energy is well trained and positioned. Can they deliver? Will they be able to monitor and report to Ugandans and account to Ugandans? We already have been getting money going into the petroleum fund, and every budget period we hear about how the fund is raided. So then what is going to happen when we start having lots of money that is coming in? So the investments are coming in well. That's a blessing. That's good. How we manage them, how we manage people whom we found in their communities, how we work around them as we invest, will determine whether this is a curse or a blessing. And indeed, we're going to talk about compensation issues. We're going to talk about national content. We're going to talk about environmental monitoring and accountability. We're going to talk about the relationship of corporate investors and the communities, the social license. And then, of course, we should be able to question around the big monies they are coming in. What happens to a country like Uganda when we start earning a lot of money from oil, and we cannot, and the appetite? Are we going to be able to contain our appetite? Are we going to be able to make the rightful investment decisions? Are we going to be able to follow our national development priorities? Or are we going to get excited and start shopping things that will not make sense and will not take us to the middle income status that we expect to go to in the nearest future? Thank you.
Wow. Onesmus, you had Winfred, and she talks about the legal framework that has been put in place, the agencies that are responsible to oversee the management of this oil production. And there's a lot of euphoria around all these opportunities that are around engineering, especially the first phase of the work that is around procurements, projects around engineering, construction. But the bigger question, or the bigger elephant in the room, is how, even when we have a protection of local content to allow local companies to partake of these opportunities, how prepared are these companies to really tap into these opportunities?
Thanks very much, Felix. Absolutely, I agree. There are quite a number of opportunities, and indeed the law and institutions are in place, but the capacities of Ugandans and the capacities of the local companies to be able to tap into some of these opportunities is still a big area that we have to deal with. In the first place, we have the issue of standards. This is an industry that actually emphasizes standards. It's not an ordinary industry where you take in anything because there are a lot of stakes in terms of investment, in terms of risks, and therefore there are high level standards expected. And I know in this country, we are using to so many substandard things. And when I talk about that, you appreciate, you go on the market, the drugs are substandard. You go on the market, everything is substandard. And it's like we don't have standards enforcement agencies. So that is one challenge that we don't yet have the capacity. I know there are quite a number of efforts, the number of institutions that have been put in place where capacity enhancement is being done. But we are not yet there, and we expect that actually we can continue learning on the job now that these opportunities are here with us. There are partnerships that can be executed, and I think that's what has worked elsewhere, that you need local companies need to enter into partnerships with other companies that have the experience and be able to tap into these opportunities. So those are some of the things that can be done. We are enhancing our capacity, we are training, but we also need partnerships so that we are able to bring in experienced human beings and companies that we can team up with to be able to take advantage of some of these opportunities. There are areas where we have the capacity. For example, if you are talking about legal services, you realize that actually we have the capacity. If you talk about accommodation, I think there is a lot of in the real estate has moved quite well, and the industry is providing a lot of opportunities in the real estate industry. But there are other technical areas, and you've talked about some of those engineering aspects where you still need a lot of capacity enhancement to be able to take advantage of these emerging opportunities.
Wow. There's a question Henry is asking, which is that speaks to what has basically bedeviled this country. There's that adage that Uganda is gifted by nature but cursed by greed. So is there a possibility that the things could be different concerning how we manage our oil? And let me pick this up with you, Winfred.
Thank you, Mr. Muguzi, for your question. I think we can't say that Uganda cannot be better. Have we seen corruption and are we tired of it? Of course, every other year, the Auditor General releases a report that shocks us. And then that's when we talk about things going bad. So often you see headlines, money getting lost, money stolen, money disappeared, money this, money that. Ugandans are tired. And I think for me, the question is, are we willing to be the change we want to see? If for the last 10 years or so, we have worked to make sure there is a very good system for monitoring, and we have set up PAO, for example, the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. We have worked on legislation. We have improved our Public Finance Management Act. We have worked with communities. We have civil society trained in monitoring, in understanding environment, understanding the economics of oil, understanding the legislation. What role are we playing? If we want to be tired and say Uganda is corrupt, there's nothing that we can do, then we won't even utilize the resources that we have already set up. We can change. One of the things that we have been looking for is understanding who our investors are, for example, in Uganda's natural resources, in mining, and in oil. We have opportunities now. We mentioned that we are members of the EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. It gives us an opportunity to know who these investors are, what kind of agreements and contracts they have with us as a country, how much resource we have, and how then do we use this information? For me, is the question, because we're going to be getting information in a timely manner. Are we able to utilize this information to cause change, whether it is to hold people to account, whether it is to patch, to close the gaps that are within our financial management systems, whether it is to censure whoever is not performing? That is up to us. Do we have the courage to do that? We should be having the courage to do that. Do we feel tired and discouraged? Probably, but that needs to stop. So if Mr. Muguzi, myself, Onesmus, and Felix, if we are willing to hold ourselves to the highest standard, if we are willing to hold our leaders themselves to the highest standard, if we understand the role of each one of the stakeholders in the sector, and they too understand their role, I think we should be able to say enough is enough. This resource has the ability to raise, our GDP. Let us not squander it, and it can always start with us. No one will come and appear in wherever money gets thrown to and tells them to stop. It has to be us who are going to ask, how much money do we have? Where are we investing it? Has it reached the beneficiary? Are the contractors paid for the work that they should have? They should construct. Have they constructed that road, whether a road, a hospital, or both agricultural inputs? Yes, it starts with us, and we can make things change. If we have the determination, yes, we can make things change. I don't want to lose hope. The challenge will be if we just sit back and expect miracles to happen. Unfortunately, they won't happen. We are the miracle workers. We are the ones that should create what we need to see.
Okay. We'll be going for a short break in short while, but before we go for a short break, let me just have one quick comment as a rejoinder, and actually it's a question to Onesmus as a rejoinder, because I understand where he is coming from, the experiences of other countries. We've seen what's happening in Angola, Nigeria, and should we say that, okay, overall, when you look at our legal infrastructure and institutional framework, it is good enough to protect us and make Uganda immune from the oil curse that stems from greed? Because I think that's where the biggest problem is.
I come in after break.
No, you can come in, then after we'll shall go for a break.
Thanks very much, Felix. The policy, legal, and institutional frameworks are very, very, very important, but these frameworks and institutions must be allowed to work. And when you look at these countries that have failed and where oil has become a curse, it's not that they don't have these legal, policy, and institutional frameworks. They are there, and some of them are quite very good. But because there is limited or lack of accountability and transparency in the manner in which business is conducted, then you find that actually there are a lot of leakages that happen. There are a lot of abuses that happen. And I will give you a very simple example. If Parliament, invites the executive to account, to explain certain situations, and the executive decides not to appear, it cannot account, and there is no penalty. That tells you that the existence of Parliament as an institution and the existence of the law is not going to change that situation. So we need the mindset change, both the leaders and the citizens of this country. While when we talked about willingness of citizens, we must also have the willingness of the leaders to change the way things are happening. Otherwise, the law, the institutions cannot operate in a vacuum. So we need governance. We need good governance for the institutions and for the law to be able to apply. And as a country, we have a choice to do that. But when you look at the legal policy institutional framework, everything looks good. We have very good legal provisions. We have set up institutions, and they really have relevant people with wide experience, highly trained, and they have the capacity to deliver. But if we don't allow them, if we don't allow that independence of these institutions to do their job, if we are not able to account to the citizens, then we may still go the way other countries have gone, which have had their natural resources as a curse. Thank you.
Okay, there you have it. Let's go for a break, and then when we come back, we will look at some of the comments the president made when we actually, in actual sense, when the final investment decision was being announced. There were some interesting comments that were made, and we tried to have a discussion around those. Let's go for a break, and then we'll resume our discussion.
Something is wrong. No one is coming to me. Nobody is minding about me. No one is yearning to see me. Hey? What is the problem?
Then we should go before they come.
Are you mad? I changed all this money for them. I want them to ask. I want to give them all this money, but no one is minding. Nobody. I changed all this for them. This is all money for them.
What should I do? How do I carry?
You go there and tell them to. You go. No. You just go. Talk to them one by one.
Hey, what has happened?
Exactly. Thank you for coming. You know, this whole place has changed. What is the matter?
What is it exactly?
No one is yearning to see me. Nobody is minding. No one is asking for money. Nothing.
Oh, is that what you mean? No. Honorable, let me tell you this.
Yes.
Things changed.
Changed?
Yes. As we, your campaigning managers, we agreed that we need parliamentarians, our honorable MPs, who present issues in parliament.
So is that what you decided?
That's what we decided.
The desire of any progressive democracy is to have citizens who focus on issue-based politics and not transactional politics, which suffocates representative democracy.
Contribute today at www.politicalfinanceafrica.org/donate.
Welcome back to ACFIM Talks from that short break. We are still discussing Ghana's oil. Is it a blessing? As this follows the final investment decision that was announced early last week, which officially unveils the long-awaited oil production in Uganda. And with me, I have Onesmus Mugyenyi, who is the Policy Analyst, and I also have with me Winfred Ngabiirwe, who is the Executive Director for Global at Uganda. And we are having this discussion. And before we took a break, we were looking at whether the legal framework, the institutions are enough to protect us from this oil becoming a curse. In fact, to pick it up from there, and I'm going to start with you, Winfred. The president, during that ceremony, made some very interesting comments about society. In fact, he said that he alluded actually to CSO's frustrating government efforts in developing the oil sector, tending to point to the fact that probably either we tend to portray a situation of as if we may not be able to manage and benefit from this oil. But overall, because it's our duty, you talked about it as our role to ensure that we keep these institutions in check, we make the process transparent as it could be, we make the institutions accountable, we could be concerning this natural resource. But what do you make of the president's comments, especially at the time he made them?
So first of all, I appreciate that the president is aware that there is civil society in Uganda and that it is doing commendable work. I think there is already a saying that a stationary vehicle does not raise dust. So listening to Mr. President and his remarks, I could tell that he acknowledges our role as civil society and he appreciates what we do. And so, yes, I want to thank him for the statements. He said some other words in Swahili, but I'm not very good at Swahili, so I don't know the other thing that he meant. I think his comment followed the speech of the CEO of Total Energies, Mr. Patrick Poyane, on allowing civil society to do the monitoring work. And indeed, the sector has been shaped by technocrats from the Ministry of Energy, by people from the legal fraternity, by economists, by citizens in their formations, including organized groups like civil society organizations, including non-governmental organizations, including church leaders. So every Ugandan has a right, every civil society in Uganda has a right and a responsibility to input in the processes, in informing the decisions on how we govern our natural resources. So that is a given. There has been over the years concerns from the civil society space of in the way the space is shrinking. And largely because when you're on the ground working with affected communities, you appreciate how much Muntu an everyday person, is ignored in when and how decisions are being made. The Tilenga project, for example, affected over 5,523 people. The Kingfisher project affected over 727 people. The refinery project affected over 7,118 persons. And that is in acquisition of land for construction of the refinery, but also for the pipelines and for the other projects that are going on. The ECOP is going to affect so many people. Civil society comes in, one, to improve on the levels of awareness of communities in terms of their rights and their responsibilities. Before the intervention of civil society, there was usually a one-sided narrative. Give us your land, one is going to be rich, we're going to give you so much money. But people were not very well prepared in understanding, one, what options they had, for example, in what form of compensation they should have received, whether to choose cash or land for land. People had grievances, and the grievance handling mechanism was not very strong. People did not understand, even government officials themselves, they did not fully appreciate and understand where communities were coming from and what was at stake for them. Now, when civil society comes in to say, hold on, we want Uganda to develop, but how? How are you dealing with the person that you found here? How can they inform the process? How can they be part of monitoring what is going on? Do you understand their concerns? Do you understand their aspirations? Do you understand their interests? Can you put them in the Uganda bigger picture? Or are you looking at only decisions that are being made by people from Kampala or by international oil companies and other investors? So when civil society comes and says, hold on, let us first go to the round table and listen to each other. Leadership, usually political leadership, tends to take that as inciting communities, as opposing investment, which is not the case. So the space in natural resource governance, not only in Uganda but worldwide, is very limited, but we are determined to work, support, to put our foot down, because we have not only a right, but also a responsibility as Ugandans to make sure that our natural resources benefit us, our natural resources benefit the people, but also people who were already living, their lives should not be largely inconvenienced by the discovery, by the investment, but rather are positioned to benefit from the natural resources and to have their voice heard, and also to determine how what comes from our natural resources is invested and consumed. And we know that, today we have a number of civil society groups that have been suspended by the NGO Bureau due to various reasons, including, by the way, due to the weaknesses of the NGO Bureau. So we will, as the president said, we'll pick our mats, we'll pick our mattresses, we'll go to the communities, we'll work with them, we will input in the Uganda's natural resource governance, because that is what we are called to do as Ugandans in our formations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Actually, did instruct the LC5 chairpersons of those districts that allow them to go there. They are free to go and also sleep in the park if they will find anything substantive, interesting. Onesmus, you could make a comment on that, but specifically help us understand, because again, in the same breath, the president is on record a couple of times referring to this oil as my oil, and help us from where you have your perspectives. What do you make of the president's language? It's a possessive language of my oil, referring to national resource. What assurances do Ugandans have that this resource will benefit them and not just a few?
Thanks very much, Felix. If you allow me, I'll just put a rejoinder to what my sister said on the president's statement, because I imagine that he's very much aware of the role of civil society, because the National Oil Gas Policy of 2008, the framers, which included the executive, of which is part, found it necessary to give a role to different stakeholders in this country, and they did recognize that there is a group called the civil society, and was also given a role to play in the National Oil and Gas Policy. And that role is basically holding government accountable. In other words, we are the watchdogs. And therefore, if you look into the mirror and it shows that you have dirt on your face, you don't break the mirror, you go and wash your face. And that's basically what we do. We reflect what is on the ground, and we expect the president and the other stakeholders to go and wash the face and not break the mirror. And we will continue to do that until the laws have been changed, until the policies have been changed, to say that civil society is irrelevant, it does not play a role, but we will continue to play our role. But leave alone being civil society, we also are citizens of this country. We are human beings and citizens of this country. And even if I do not belong to civil society, even if I do not belong to a code, I have a right, if I see an issue, to make a contribution and raise that issue so that that issue is addressed. But Felix, civil society has played a fundamental role in this sector. If you look at all the laws that have been put in place, civil society has there a footprint. I mean, we've made contributions. We give alternative ideas, and some of these ideas have found their way into these policies. So we associate ourselves with these policy makers and the legislature that has been able to put these laws in place. And probably that's why we are proud of these laws. Going to the statement, the president calling it my oil, I think it relates basically to the time when we had active exploration activities relating to this sector. And I imagine that calling it my oil means that these activities became more active during his regime, because I know he's a very, very intelligent president. He knows that certainly this is not his oil, and I imagine that he uses that word in reference to his regime, because most exploration activities became active during his term of office. If he uses it to refer to something different, that will be unfortunate. But I want to believe that he uses it in good faith to mean that those activities have become active during his regime, which has done some positive things in a number of areas, but had also had its own challenges. I could probably.
Okay, there are some comments that are coming. All right. There are some comments that have been coming from the screen. I think there was one comment concerned with the future of civil society. What is the future of civil society following the remarks made by the president? The beauty is that he did allow civil society actors to actually go and follow the activities and ensure that everything is done according to the book. Also, there were some comments around whether CSOs are part of the unsung heroes that are greatly contributing to the sector. Indeed. But let me come to a question here, which I think, let me start with Winfred on this one, concerning the way the partnership is structured and framed. When you look at the documentation, which I happen to come up with, and I'm sure you have it, in this joint venture partnership, the Uganda National Oil Company owns 15% upstream on the upstream projects, and then Total Energy is owning 56.7%, and CNOOC 28.33. And then when you look at the Undercop project, which is taking care of the interest of Uganda, is only about 15%, and then Total 62%, CNOOC 8%, meaning usually Total is the biggest shareholder, given the investment share capital in the oil production project. But when you look at the share value of Uganda, did we negotiate right? What's your take?
I think I wouldn't have a problem with having only 15%, because that also determines how much money you're willing to invest in the business. So by Uganda investing only up to 15%, of the required capital, I think it is okay, being that we are a small country, we are a poor country, so we do not have too much money to throw around, especially for a sector that we do not understand very well as of now. Because UNOC is going to be going to Parliament to get a budget reallocation. That is taxpayers' money. They are taking a risk, and it could pay us off, or we could lose it. Considering that, this is the first time we're investing in a sector like oil, we don't know how well, how trained our people at UNOC are. We know that they are trained, but we don't know how well they are able to manage the commercial interests, the oil game. We don't know, the politics that come with having a national oil company. Sometimes the money that, you put in doesn't even actually do the actual work. So I think for me, 15% is okay for a poor country like Uganda. And the question would be, what is the money that we are giving UNOC is doing, but also the money that UNOC receives as a business from doing business. where that money goes and how it is, accounted for. Of course, the country will benefit from, will receive taxes, capital gains, the investments that are going to happen. So our benefits are not only stopping at UNOC's participation. Our benefits that we're going to reap far much and beyond UNOC's participation. So 15% is good. We can start with that. We can, make sure that UNOC does represent us well economically, and would be disappointed if it became some house for, channeling money to be swindled. Would be disappointed if they didn't make the right decisions and right investments. Would be disappointed if they did work that is out of scope of why they were formed and what they are supposed to do. For now, I think it's okay. It really should be okay. 15 shareholding is not something very small at all, as you may think it is. Even 10% would still be very good. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of investment required, but also it's a lot of money that comes in if they do smart business.
Let me. Sorry, let me Onesmus on first of all your thoughts on that share capital. I remember there was a time when the issue of production sharing agreements being made public was one of those things that civil society were pushing for. Eventually, that's now it's very clear how much government of Uganda is getting out of this. But is that a fair deal when we look at the distribution?
Thanks. Yeah, from where we are coming from, the joint venture, there are several models that countries have looked at. And when you weigh them, given the circumstances of the country, where you don't have a lot of capital, this is a very good model. And when you look at the level of investment that is required, you also realize that we don't have a lot of resources to invest. And therefore, we need really to look at that percentage vis-a-vis what we have as a country that we can actually invest. You realize that actually much of the capital is we are borrowing. When you borrow, you're expected to pay interest. If we had our own resources, yes, we would aspire to have certainly more shares. But given the circumstances, I think 15% is good enough. And we've also put in place laws and tax structures that can help us to make more money beyond the profits that we get as a result of this investment. So you can get money from this investment that we've done, but you're also able to get money from the taxes because of the fiscal regime that has been put in place. So when you look at it, it's a fair deal. It's a fair deal. We're happy about it. The most important thing is finally how it is executed, and the win has already indicated that if we don't have a efficient monitoring system in place, even when you have a very good fiscal regime, you can still have leakages and lose out on taxes. And you've already seen some of those aspects where we've been in court, international arbitration, dealing with taxes. So there's still a lot of work to be done to make sure that we do adequate monitoring so that we don't lose money that we are entitled to. But on the face of it, I think it's a fair deal and we can go with that.
Okay. Question around the local content policies, whether it's going to benefit you, and we shall be answering that as one of our parting shots. But there's a question to Winfred here, like I promised, concerning the way compensations have been handled, because Uganda has a history of undervaluing. We've seen many cases of where government undervalues properties of individuals that are supposed to be compensated when it comes to government projects. I want to understand how this has been handled concerning especially those communities where the pipeline is going to pass, because that at some point was a very big issue. How is this being handled, and how have they been really protected from being exploited?
I think we look at the issue of compensation from two angles. There is what people expect, and there is what the government is willing to pay. So the process for valuation starts with the local districts. They are the ones that do surveys and determine what things go for. What is the cost of land? What is the cost of food? What is the cost of a mango tree? This age? What is the cost of a house? And they work hand in hand with the chief government valuer's office. Usually, we have seen people complaining of low values, and sometimes it's been genuine, like the values are really low, and there has been push and shove between people that are affected, whose land is going to be taken, whose coffee is going to be cut, whose property is going to be, whose houses are going to be demolished, because they feel realistically that this money is not enough. And indeed, mediations have gone on, conversations have gone on, and in some cases, the prices or the values have been improved to reflect the circumstances on the ground. There are people that have rejected the values because they know what they invested in, they know what the actual value is, and they feel that government is not giving them a fair deal. And they have gone to court, and they have a right to go to court because they need to get what is fair. So compensation has to be fair, has to be adequate, and has to be timely. And that is what we tell companies, that's what we ask of government, that when they are undertaking compensation, they make sure that it is fair, it is adequate, and it is timely. The challenges we also see is that the cutoff dates are announced today, and people are not compensated 3 years later. And because expectations for oil are going up, the value of land is going up, speculation is in. People feel, and rightly so, that you cannot compensate them for or at the price at which you valued their land or property 3 years back. And those grievances are there, and we think that government should and must respond. The government has usually put a certain percent, I think 15%, if they delay. But even that 15% is less than what is required in terms of the inconveniences that are caused for the time that you take when you're not utilizing your land, when it has been earmarked, and you cannot utilize it, and you're not compensated to go and look for land elsewhere. But the major issues for me are who is at the table when compensation discussions are going on, who is compensated between the landowner, the land user, and people whose interests are not registered and not necessarily recognized in the compensation process. We find a lot of challenge around that. We find a lot of discrepancies between registered land and unregistered land and how it is valued. The While for me, land remains as variable, whether registered with a title or not. I think that contractors and government need to recognize that unregistered, untitled land is as variable as titled land, and so they should not dismiss people's concerns and tell them that their land is cheaper because it does not have a title. We find that women are not at the table, yet they use the land, they depend on that land when compositions are being discussed. We find that some crops are not counted, and these are genuine concerns that have to be addressed. There are other things that are very hard to put a price at. In rural areas, people, they will sit under a shade. They will have their lunch under a shade. They will do things. They will have medicines from provided by nature. But when competition is going on, or valuation is going on, how much do you pay for that shade that communities have been using, families have been using to sit under, to have their meals, to rest? How do you value a shade that because there's this tree that you've given money, yes, but we are using this tree beyond just the fruits. There is the shade, there is the medicine part of it, there is the cultural value attached to that. So we think that those are the concerns that valuers need to think through and understand that many things mean beyond economic value, and they also have to be compensated, and they have to be understood. The graves, the issues around grave reallocation, I think have also been of concern. Not very well valued, their transportation, their relocation, and the cultural norms and practices that go around, how we treat our departed relatives and family. There are issues to do with access to natural resources, to water, to firewood, that when we are, valuing our compensation and prices, we don't usually think through. Yet for an ordinary family member, for an ordinary man and woman, you need to make sure that when you compensate them or you reallocate them, you don't give them extra burden. You make sure that they have the exact services, or actually better services than they had before you compensated them, and that has to be part of the evaluation exercise. That has to be part of the evaluation report, and that has to be appreciated and paid. The COVID pandemic, of course, affected a lot of works around the ECOP. So land which had been earmarked, but compensation did not come in time because work stalled. There were some challenges here and there, and we understand that. But we felt that information flow from the duty bearers on what was going on, and when compensation was expected, so that people can move on, can reallocate on when compensation was going to be done. It was not communicated in time, and that causes misinformation, that causes anxiety, and that takes away social license that investors and government need for projects like ECOP to succeed. By and large, I think that the issue of gender really needs to be given attention, the young people. But at the end of the day, all Ugandans need to benefit. We shouldn't look at the pipeline as a bigger picture and forget that there was life before the pipeline, and there will always be life during and after the pipeline. So let's treat our people better. Let's discuss compensation and valuation. Let us not throw the big words around and intimidate people that are asking for fair, for adequate compensation. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. That you really done justice. Our time is spent. 3 minutes into the top of the hour. I'm just going to allow Onesmus a parting shot for within 2 minutes, but also touch the aspects to do with the environmental impact assessment, whether in that area, our environment, as we aggressively undertake project, the environmental concerns, what we can take care of in just 2 minutes as we wrap up.
Thank you very much, Forex. There are two things I think we need to appreciate, both from government and the community and citizens, that Uganda has a very complex land tenure system, and therefore you have overlapping rights over this land, and therefore at times when you are dealing with some of these rights, it takes quite some time. So when government is planning, that must be taken into consideration. The second thing that should be taken into consideration is the time when actually you do the valuation and when you do the compensation. This business of doing the valuation, but you've not appropriated the funds, and then you create this gap between when actually you've done the valuation and when you appropriate funds and pay, must be dealt with, because that is very, very, very important. But going to the last point that you've raised, because the rest of the issues, I think Winfred has talked about them that have to be taken into consideration. The one of the areas that most of the time is ignored, and why you may not see impacts in the short term, are the environmental aspects. And many things are always ignored. Yes, very true. The social and environmental impact assessments have been done, and there are mitigation measures that have been talked about. Certificates have been issued with conditions, but one big challenge has been monitoring and enforcement. And this is not very surprising, because you also know that we've had other environmental laws in the country, but having the environmental laws has not stopped actually degradation of the environment. And that's why the citizens are a little bit worried that if we have laws, you have these penalties, and you've not been able to enforce these laws, what magic are we going to have now to ensure that these environmental and social impact assessment, the mitigation measures that have been proposed, are going to be implemented? So that is the biggest concern. Yes, there are a few areas, there are gaps that we see in these assessments, but the most critical thing is monitoring and enforcing the conditions that have been provided for in these certificates that have been approved. And that is the area where we need to strengthen our institutions. If you are talking about NEMA, you have to strengthen NEMA, but we must also deal with issues of corruption, so that these conditions that we put in place, the laws that we put in place, we are able to implement those laws. And I would stop it at that, Alexa. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Onesmus. Thank you so much. Onesmus, who is the public policy analyst, and also is the advocate for High Court of Uganda and a member of Uganda Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Also with me, I had Winfred Ngabiirwe, who is the executive director of Global Rights Alert, and he's also an active member of Publish Watch of the Uganda Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, EITI, and we've been discussing Uganda's oil is a blessing on cast. Always a pleasure to have both of you. And I myself was Felix Kafuma moderating this session. Till next time, bye bye, take care.